The British Labor leader Jeremy Corbyn's election campaign has suffered a serious blow after renewed claims of anti-Semitism. A former member of the party's inner circle says he's not fit to lead the country because of his tolerance of anti-Jewish attitudes. Ian Austin is calling voters to support instead the Labor leader's main rival, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in the December ballot. Mr Austin is among the 7 lawmakers who left the Labor Party in February over anti-Semitism and its convoluted Brexit policy. Let's go live to Michael Kroger, former Victorian Liberal Party president. How damaging is that, do you think, for Corbyn and his prospects?
Look, very damaging. It's one thing, Kieran, to be criticised by a former party member who might have resigned over a superannuation policy or negative gearing or, something like that. But to be criticised publicly by former Labor Party members in the middle of an election campaign over anti-Semitism is an entirely different issue. This goes to the core of whether Corbyn is fit to lead, and he's had these former members say he's not fit to lead the country. That's a devastating blow for Corbyn. I mean, Corbyn is unelectable anyway, but this just reinforces in the minds of many people why they can't vote for him. So devastating for Corbyn at this stage of the campaign.
It seems also that there is such a large cohort of current and former Labor figures who, if the structure of the voting of the leader wasn't the way it was, that they'd have someone else in there anyway. So, that, as you say, he appears unelectable, but also many of his own colleagues think the same thing.
Well, of course they do. And Tom Watson, the deputy, is now leaving, and you've got ringing in the ears of many people in Britain is that Panorama program a few months ago, which went for an hour. It's like it's their equivalent of Four Corners, detailing anti-Semitism within the British Labor Party, which got huge traction. And it basically convicted the British Labor Party of doing nothing about claims of anti-Semitism, that anti-Semitism was rife within the British Labor Party. And why wouldn't it be when you've got a leader who has basically said good things about Hamas and Hezbollah, who's sided basically with elements of the IRA? I mean, this guy is a real political extremist. I mean, one of his candidates, a left-wing candidate in one of his seats who he's friendly with, said she'd celebrate the death of Benjamin Netanyahu and of Tony Blair, who later forced to apologise. But you've got these type of freak shows running as Labor candidates. No, in another world, they'd have a leader like Tony Blair, who was appreciated by Middle Britain, or even a Gordon Brown. But this guy's right off the plane, mate. He's right off the plane.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is there any prospect, because with Ian Austin, a former backer of Gordon Brown, one of his close allies, and then Watson, as you mentioned, the deputy, it's all very late in the piece, but is there a mechanism by which they could dump him before the poll?
No, there isn't, and it can't happen. And this is a problem which has been bedeviling Labor for years now. I mean, of course, he did well in the 2017 election, so he's sort of riding on the coattails of that good result, which was largely because of Theresa May was a very poor leader and thoroughly uninspiring, as we know. But no, they can't change him and won't change him, but they'll certainly change him after the election. He'll resign because he's now mid-20s in the polling, and Labor are not going to win the election at a time where, because of all the problems in the Conservative Party, they should be doing well. But they've got this guy, who's an extremist. Everyone knows he's an extremist, and he won't get elected. But as for changing him, no, too late.
Yeah. Well, someone who, was not an extremist, I don't think by anyone's estimation, but was not elected either, was the former Labor leader, Bill Shorten. He was the favourite, as we know, right up until the end in terms of the bookies, in terms of the published polls. But it seemed complacency and a cluttered agenda, as well as an unpopular leader, they all conspired to mean that he was not successful.
Well, none of that's true, of course. And you read this report and you think, boy, what if Shorten had won? What they actually said, because everyone thought they were going to win till... So if you'd said, right, it's Friday, day before the election, can you write the review now? I want to release it on Monday as to why we won. what they said. Look, I've got to congratulate the authors of the report. And I've seen a million of these reports over time. I've said to you before, you cannot tell in this report what actually happened. You can't be honest. You have to give a million ideas. The masseur didn't massage his legs properly, or the towel was warm, or the the poster was upside down at the polling booth, or the advertising wasn't any good, or the digital media wasn't any good. All of these, and all these what I call 1%ers. Weatherall and Emerson and the other four cannot say what actually happened in this election. Two things happened in this election, and everybody knows it. If they could have listened to Graham Richardson, who made very clear why they lost the election. You don't need to be Albert Einstein to know that tax policies and the Adani policy killed the Labor Party. That's what happened in this election. All this other gump. Shorten was no more unpopular in 19 than he was in 16, by the way. He's the same bloke, same unpopular bloke. Plenty of unpopular leaders have won. Jeff Kennett won in 1992 against Joan Kerner, the state election. He was wildly unpopular. She was preferred premier by a mile. She got slaughtered, he won. You can win an election with an unpopular leader. Malcolm Fraser was never that popular, to be honest. No, they got beaten because they had extreme tax policies which weighed heavily on Middle Australia, and Middle Australia didn't want it. And secondly, the whole Adani fiasco, where they had two messages, sent terrible shockwaves through working class Australia, who thought, well, if they can do that to the coal industry, to Queenslanders and essentially Western Australians by being anti the mining industry and listen to the sort of woke inner city, that's a bad message. They are the two reasons Labor lost the election. They had the nonsense that I've read, they had a cluttered policy agenda. No one came up to me during the campaign, by the way, and said, I'm voting against a cluttered policy agenda. There's too much clutter. Oh, that's garbage. Another piece of garbage. The failure to adapt to a new leader. Well, that's not why the election. A weak strategy. No, it wasn't a weak strategy. Scott Morrison and Graham Richardson, and anyone with half a brain knows they lost because of the tax policies in Adani. That's why they lost. The bottom line, you read this report, it's funny. The 2016 results...
Michael, it's a valid point in terms of the tax policies, absolutely. But if you read through the jargon, that's basically what they're saying. They couldn't come up with a sharp message. The reason being because the policies themselves were, well, how do you get a sharp message around policies that were flawed?
Right. So they don't actually say anywhere the reason we lost was because of the capital gains tax policy, the franking credits policy, the negative gearing policy, and the fiasco over Adani. They don't put it in those succinct words. And they can't do that. I know why they can't do it, because you cannot blame, the guilty. Because as soon as you say that's why we lost, the next story is, will you dump those policies? And they don't want to dump those policies. They believe in those policies, and they might bring modified versions to the next election. But they're not doing what we did. After 2007, we dumped work choices straight away because it's, rightly or wrongly, it's the principal reason, or the second reason we lost the election. The main reason we lost in 2007 was because of the longevity of the Howard government. Most governments will lose after 10 to 15 years. They're on their last legs. People just want to change. But Kieran, here's the other thing that the report doesn't go into. Can these luminaries explain why the 16 and 19 results were almost identical? If this was such a shocking campaign and such a disaster, how is it the result was almost exactly the same as 16? This is what happened in 2016. We won 76 seats. At this election, we won 77. In 16, Labor won 69. In this election, they won 68. And there were 6 independents now instead of 5. The results were actually identical. We got a swing to us of 1%. But in terms of seats, the results in 16 and 19 were identical. How do they explain that? The reason is they can't. It was to do with policy. That's why they lost. Everybody knows that.
Great to hear from you and speak to you this morning on a range of issues. Michael, we're out of time.
Thanks, Kieran.
Catch you next
Cheers.
week. Thanks.
All of it.